isn't data. This is guess. And there's something weird underneath it. It has this guise of compassion. Oh, we're going to save the poor in the future. It's like that's what the bloody communists said. And the alternative to that is to stop having global level elites plot out a utopian future or even an anti-dystopian future.
I can't believe he's saying this. If anyone should understand how stupid this argument is, it should be him. It should be him.
Another one of the hottest years on record. How many times are we going to have another hottest year on record? How many times are we going to have an increase of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere before we're finally like, okay.
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because it depends. The scientific answer to that question depends precisely on the time frame over which you evaluate the climate fluctuation. And that's actually an intractable scientific problem. So you might say, well, if you take the last 100 years, this variation looks pretty dismal. And I'd say, well, what if you took the last 150,000 years? Or the last 10,000 or the last 10 million? You can't specify the damn time frame of analysis.
The time frame is incredibly important. That would be like saying, look at your, let's say somebody developed cancer and they didn't realize it, and the person has lost, 40 or 50 pounds in the past 6 months. And I'm just like, you look very sickly. And you're like, okay, well, look at my weight fluctuation over the past 10 years. You say, well, that doesn't really matter. What matters is the fact that
I'm not saying the time frame isn't important. Well, but I'm saying that it is important. Yeah, but I'm saying I don't know how to specify it.
Well, you would probably specify it with the beginning of the industrial age, right?
Why?
Because that's when carbon dioxide, which is a gas that's seen as trapping more heat on the planet.
Why is that relevant to the time over which you compute the variability?
Because it seems like as carbon dioxide.
Okay, this is where Peterson, I feel like, is now like engaging poorly, right? I'm not going to say bad faith, but it's like, why wouldn't the molecule, it's like, if Peterson doesn't think that carbon dioxide is trapping heat in, then he could say, but why? But if he thinks that carbon dioxide is trapping heat in, and we do see evidence that greater carbon dioxide emissions occurred with the Industrial Revolution, that is the window that matters. In fact, you could probably argue that you should compare post-industrial revolution carbon dioxide and weather matrices to pre. You probably couldn't do pre, but you could at least compare things like, is the patterns increasing? Like, I don't like Peterson's, like, I think he started with some really good criticisms of climate change prediction models that I actually think are pretty solid. As somebody who's friends with other people who like work in these things, a lot of the early criticisms that he made of like, well, they don't account for a whole bunch of stuff. Their predictive power is pretty low because they keep running into like, we didn't even realize that the weather did this thing, which is why the model kept on being wrong for like the first like 20 to 30 years. Also, Al Gore, fuck that guy. He just fucked climate science for everyone. Fuck Al Gore, okay? Fuck that guy. Except for his new, he's got a charity. Good for him. But these are not doing it for me. And I'm a Peterson simp, okay?
It has increased in the atmosphere. The surface temperatures have risen at a rate that is a departure from what we'd expect over 150,000 year cycles of temperature variations on the planet.
No, not with that time frame. That's
absolutely.
Just not the case.
It's absolutely the case.
No, what do you mean? You just flipped to 150,000 year time span.
What I'm saying is that if we expect to see a temperature do this in a 150,000 year time span, in a 100 year time span, seeing it do this, that's very worrying. Now,
you mean like Michael Mann's hockey stick, the one that's under attack right now in court by a major statistician who claimed that he falsified his data? I mean, that spike?
I'm talking about...
Damn. The problem is that I think Steven's pretty out of his depth for this one. I don't know if he prepped on it. When I say out of his depth, I don't mean like out of his scope or capacity. I don't know if he's prepped much on climate change. I don't think he knows about this. Like the hockey. I could be wrong, but I suspect that he didn't prep for it nearly as much, which like sucks because Peterson knows a ton of the research that he can kind of just like whip out. And I don't know either. I have no idea. It sucks to be in this position where you're like, well, I don't like, because you can't be in this type of conversation now and be like, well, I don't know about that. And I don't know about that. And I don't know about that. And I don't know about that. It's a pretty weak position. Prep, like he should have prepped knowing what common climate change, like naysayers, specifically what Jordan Peterson cites, because he talks about climate change all the time, as far as like evidence against it and which studies he thinks are falsified and if there's any evidence to them being falsified and blah, 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 blah. For the uneducated in the back, what's the hockey stick? I don't know the study he's talking about, but I think the hockey stick that he's talking about. So my understanding, okay, I'm uber rudimentary. This is what I'm citing from like bio from like 2017 and then talking with my environmentalist friends. That thing that Destiny was talking about, that little graph of weather over like 150,000 years, my understanding is that's what we expect in fluctuations of heat between like, I think 2 degrees either like of baseline of the planet, of like the global climate average is like this, right? The hockey stick would be basically, it goes down like a hockey stick and then it shoots up. And that is like a study that's being claimed. My understanding is, I don't think it's the only study, to be clear. I think it's one of the many studies that is used to evidence basically the massive jump in temperature and I think carbon dioxide. But genuinely, somebody look up the study. Really don't quote me, but my understanding is basically the graph goes like this, like a hockey stick, down, up, like a hockey stick. And he is saying that it's in court for being like incorrect. And I have no idea. I don't know. No idea.
The record temperatures that are declared, that have been declared for like the past.
It goes back 5 to 20,000 years to show the difference in temperatures globally per year. Okay, there you go. That person sounds like they know more. Don't actually know if they do. They could be also making up shit, but really, truly defer to anyone else over me for that. This is just what I'm remembering off the top of my head.
Past 5 years that have also
What's a hockey stick for us non-Canadians? I think like a stick, but then at the end of your stick is another stick that kind of goes perpendicular to the first stick.
increased with the
I don't understand what the court case would be. It's like I don't know. Ask Jordan Peterson. Okay, I'm gonna stop man answering. Let's just look it up, guys. Okay, we're looking it up. Fuck it. We're gonna do the fact finding right now. We should keep this popped out and just make him very teeny tiny. All right, hockey stick, climate science case. Accused man of manipulating his data in his famous 1998 hockey stick. Okay, here we go. Sure. A man won a defamation lawsuit against 2 conservative writers last week. Ooh. This was in February. Verdict was 12 years in the making. In 2012, Randy Simberg and Mark Stan accused man of manipulating his data related to his famous hockey stick graph, which depicts the rising global temperatures after the Industrial Revolution. Okay. Simberg compared him to former Penn State football coach. Okay, wow. Wild comparison. Reviews by Penn State and the National Science found no scientific wrongdoing. And in fact, the iconic graph has since been supported by numerous studies. Uh-oh. I read talks with Michael Mann, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that was it. It was the court case was the defamation of people basically comparing him to a child sex abuser. Wild claim. And for those of you, I guess, hold on, we'll go back, who want to see the hockey stick graph. What's his name? Michael Mann, hockey stick. There you go. Images. This is like the graph that we're talking about. And this is like the jump in global temperatures since in the 2000s. Okay. Ta-da! Here's a study on the temperature reconstructions of Common Era. Blah, 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 blah. The database has gathered records from 648, nearly half of the proxy time series significant chlorine with the had correct. Don't know what any of this means. I'm not a climate scientist. Read this on your own. Have fun. Look it up. Look up Nature, a global multi-proxy database for temperature reconstructions. Have fun. Delicious. All right, go ahead.
concentration of parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
That's a wild thing for Peterson to say then. That is true. What did he say about it? Now that we know the facts, hold on, Peterson.
Who claimed that he
span in 100 is that if we expect to see a temperature do this in a 150,000 year time span, in a 100 years time span, seeing it do this, that's very worrying. Now,
you mean
it could
like
be the
Michael
case,
Mann's hockey stick, the one that's under attack right now in court by a major statistician who claimed that he falsified his data. I mean, that's
by a major statistician. Okay. That's crazy that he's citing that. Is Michael Mann under a different thing? Michael Mann, statistician, fabricated data. Is there another one? Damn, this poor man has probably been charged with it so many times. No, the only recent one is the $1 million verdict that he won on defamation. Oh boy, Pete. You're a little bad faith on this one there, buddy. He's saying the data was falsified. What the fuck?
Mike?
I'm talking.
Oh yeah, was this podcast before the decision? Because when was the podcast? Hold on, let me look at me and Steven's messages. I bet you I said Peterson. I'm pretty sure I said Peterson. Hold on, because I freaked out. You're going to be on Peterson on the 3rd.
Super chat.
February
$5
3rd.
From Red Pill King. Honest question here. Would you ever consider being in a 3-way with Destiny?
No. I love Steven so much, but we are so platonically friends. No. Mm-mm. When was the verdict? So February 9th. Damn, this aged not well. So the case he's talking about, they're talking on February 3rd. 6 days later, the verdict comes out about the fabricated data, and he is awarded, Michael Mann, the hockey stick researcher, is awarded $1 million in winning his defamation case.
Talking about the record temperatures that have been declared for like the past 5 years that have also increased with the concentration of parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Roy Jaw, your ability to read people socially probably belies your ability to have a relationship too. Good job.
I mean, I'm not going to tell you that every model is perfect.
They're
but
not
right now,
perfect.
sure, but right now we're like standing in traffic with our eyes closed saying the car hasn't hit me yet, so I don't think there's any coming. I think it's pretty undeniable at this point that there is an impact on climate across the planet. I
think that's highly deniable. We have no idea what the impact is from. We don't know where the carbon dioxide is from. We can't measure the warming of the oceans. We have terrible temperature records going back 100 years. Almost all the terrestrial temperature detection sites were first put outside urban areas, and then then you have to correct. Then you have to correct for the movement of the urban areas, and then you introduce an error parameter that's larger than the purported increase.
I really hate this because the worst part to me about this is that like he's outlining all of the complexities associated with climate science, which I agree, it's very complicated. It's why a lot of especially early on prediction models were probably ass. And most good climate scientists would tell you prediction models are tough because there's lots of that we just don't know that we don't know until we do prediction models and they end up being incorrect 10 years later. Like, I can't believe he's saying this. As somebody who studies, so just so you guys have an understanding of his field, he studies personality psych. He studies one of the most empirically robust personality tests called the Ocean or Big Five or Neo-PIR. It's got a bunch of names. Only Ocean is like the fun name. The Big Five personality trait, he talks about it all the time. He was a legitimate researcher for it. He's a pretty esteemed researcher for it. His studies were cited a lot, okay? So he's actually a really big deal when it comes to like personality psych research. And it's very empirical stuff, just to be clear. It's good.
$2 from 3 Akak. Did you see Andrew Wilson raise 20K? Flushed face. Mind blown.
I love how many of you are in my chat. You guys are fucking retarded. I genuinely think that money is probably at this point better with Andrew because he at least will spend it on useful things instead of like OnlyFans models like you guys.
From Ligers Your Schneider. Measurements are not perfect, but he is letting perfection be the enemy of good. The models are good/okay doesn't mean they are entirely wrong.
Exactly. And he should know this because he's working in like a very statistically complex field. The Neo-PIR, the creation and the testing and measurement of it is so fucking complicated. What do you mean we can't measure the temperature of the ocean? How the fuck do we measure somebody's extroversion consistently and universally? It's complicated, but also we figured it out. This is like trying to explain IQ measurements to dumb fucks who don't know anything about it. It's super frustrating because they're like, well, isn't there imperfections and isn't there flaws with IQ testing? You're like, yes, all of these things are true, and it doesn't make the study itself just not real. It doesn't mean climate science as a body is just falsified. And I don't understand why he's giving this argument specifically because of what he studies in psychology. If anyone should understand how stupid this argument is, it should be fucking him. It should be him. It's crazy.
And temperature that you're planning to measure. This isn't data. This
like
is
sort of money.
guess. And there's something weird underneath it. There's something weird that isn't oriented well towards human beings underneath it. It has this guise of compassion. Oh, we're going to save the poor in the future.
Taylor.
It's like that's what the bloody communists said. And they killed a lot of people doing it. And we're walking down that same road now with this insistence that, you know, we're so compassionate that we care about the poor 100 years from now. And if we have to wipe out several 100 million of them now, well, that's a small price to pay for the future utopia. And we've heard that sort of thing before. And the alternative to that is to stop having global level elites plot out a utopian future or even an anti-dystopian future. And that's exactly what's happening now with organizations like the WEF. And if this wasn't
It's crazy how he's making intelligent arguments are so incredibly wrong. And the thing is, like, there are legitimate criticisms to climate science. I think that there absolutely, especially in the early days, like climate science people should be mad at Al Gore and like the super hyper reactive reactionaries who handled all of climate change and climate data so poorly and were so smugly confident about it when they had no right to be confident about that at all. And the problem is that now much better climate data researchers are kind of picking up at the pieces of a little bit of like the PR decimated field that they were left behind. But that doesn't mean that the field itself is still wrong. Like 30 years later, it's just insane. Of course, a science can improve over time. It's okay that the prediction models weren't great. The actual problem was the level of confidence people put in the prediction models when we had no way to be that confident in them at all because they were very, very, especially the Michael Mann stuff, right? This stuff is kind of nascent to some degree. I don't know. The overconfidence was the problem because it's ascientific to be that confident about predicting something like global weather models. But at the same time, it's okay.
immediately impacting the poor in a devastating manner, I wouldn't care about it that much, but it is. You know, I watched over the course of the last 5 years, the estimates of the number of people who were in serious danger of food privation rise from about 100 million to about 350 million. That's a major price to pay for a little bit of, what would you say, for progress on the climate front that's so narrow it can't even be measured.
I don't think the increase in hungry people on the planet is because of climate policies.
Why not?
Because I don't think that countries in Africa are being pushed away from fossil fuels. I think most developing
Of course
nations
they are.
are.
They can't even get loans from the World Bank to produce.
Yeah, I mean, calling climate change global warming in the first place set us back like 20 years. Yeah, there was this documentary I watched. It's mostly pretty cringe and biased, but they interviewed specifically one of the like comms PR heads that pushed a lot of the Al Gore and the early climate science stuff, and they were so inappropriate in how they were handling the information. The issue is like and it's kind of the same with COVID. Just because somebody was incorrect and mishandled the data previously doesn't mean the entire field and all of the data is a lie and there's a massive conspiracy. Like chalk up to human hubris and human like foolishness long before you chalk it up to global elite conspiracy.
Pursue fossil fuel development. And there's plenty of African leaders who are screeching at the top of their lungs about that because the elites in the West have decided that, well, it was okay for us to use fossil fuel so that we wouldn't have to starve to death and our children had some opportunities. But maybe the starving masses that are too large a load for the world anyways shouldn't have that opportunity. And that's direct policy from the UN.
That's a better argument. Yes, that's true. It's kind of cringe, but this is, to be honest, a pretty leftist argument.
Fostered by organizations.
Okay for us, not for you. It's like, yeah, it's that's a leftist argument right now.
Like the W.
But that's not the same argument as saying all of the models are corrupt, bad, and untrue, and that Michael Mann made up his
WEF. They're going to have to turn to renewables. Yeah, well, good luck with that. because renewables have no energy density. Besides that, they're not renewable and they're not environmentally friendly. And then one more thing, there's one more weird thing underneath all of this.
Okay.
Well, let's say if carbon dioxide was actually your bugbear and it was genuine. Well, then why wouldn't the Greens, for example, in Africa, the progressives, be agitating to expand the use of nuclear energy? Especially because Germany has to import it anyways, especially because France has demonstrated that it's possible. We could drive down the cost of energy with low-cost nuclear, and there'd be no carbon production. And then the poor people would have
Michael
something to
Mann's
eat.
data is fraudulent. His data has been investigated so many times at this point, and it has never been found to be fraudulent. You dumb fuck. Like, what? I'm sorry. At what burden do you need to believe something? You have to have a line of credulity. You must. There must be a line of credulity. What evidence would be required for you to believe that Michael Mann's data wasn't fabricated? What is it? Is it multiple different independent bodies saying that it wasn't fabricated? Was it him just recently winning the defamation trial against people saying that it was fabricated? Maybe that's not enough. Okay. What about multiple major science oversight committees also deciding that no data fraud occurred? It's crazy to me, especially right now in 2024, when there are entire companies dedicated to finding data fraud. And data fraud is like one of the most pressing academic interests right now. There are so many bodies, there are so many researchers pushing into data fraud and trying to find bad science. It's actually insane. There's no line. If that isn't enough evidence that maybe Michael Mann was just right, there isn't a line for you. And if there isn't a line for you, you're just being a zealot. You're just being religious. You're just believing by faith at this point. So don't come at me with your facts and logic if that's the case. You have to have a line of credulity.
Have enough energy, and that isn't what's happening. And that's one of the things that makes me extremely skeptical of the entire narrative. It's like two things. The left will sacrifice the poor to save the planet. And the left will deindustrialize.
Science is determined. St. Manny, come in my Discord right now. We can chat about it. We can actually chat if you think that that's my position. I'm in my Discord right now. You can press !Discord. You can hop into my waiting room and we can chat about it. If you have no face, no voice, then shut the fuck up. But if you actually believe that your position is correct and I'm a dumbass, then you should be very big and brave and be able to fight me. Hop on in. Anytime. Somebody type it for him. Can somebody type !Discord so that he can have it? So we can hop on in. Go ahead. Notice how silent he is now. Not a post, not a comment. Definitely not in the waiting room. Very interesting. Big talk for a keyboard warrior, you fucking loser. I love seeing kind of sweep it up for Destiny. I've argued against Destiny multiple times already in this Peterson review, you dumb Again, hop in my Discord. Feel free. You got a big thing to say? Hop on in. Thank you, new channel. Come on, St. Manny, Saint Manny. Hop on in. Go ahead. I think all I'm doing is mopping up for Destiny. Hop on in. We can talk about all of the criticisms that I've already had against Destiny. The worst part is they'll be like, oh, whatever. I'm just one guy. I don't know why me taking you seriously as another human being is your dunk all of a sudden. Crickets. Okay, let's go back to
level,
it.
despite the fact that it devastates the poor. And that's
Coward.
even worse, because if you devastate the poor and you force them into a short-term orientation, in any given country where starvation beckons, for example, they will cut down all the trees.
Would I ever debate JP on this, on climate change? Shh, maybe. I would need to do a lot of research, though. Like, there's certain stuff that I don't know much about. Like, when he's talking about, like, all the questions about how you combine and find all this data, I don't have the answer. I don't know the answer to it.
And they will kill down all the animals, and they will destroy the ecosphere. And so even by the standards of the people who are pushing the carbon dioxide externality control, all the consequences of that doctrine appear to me to be devastating, even by their own measurement principles. We're trying to fix the environment. Well, boys and girls, doesn't look like it's working. All you've managed to do is make energy 5 times as expensive and more polluting. you were wrong. That didn't work. And so, and I can't understand. You can help me. That's why you're here today talking to me. I can't understand how the left can support this.
Just one quick thing. Let's say that everything you've said is true. What do you think is the plan then? What is the goal? What is the drive? Like, why push obviously horrible ideas for the planet and the poor?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Well, because you're positing it, right? So what do you think is the driver goal?
Well, I listened.
Destiny said JP has insane views on depression and ADHD. What do you know about that? I have no idea what he's talking about. Apparently he now like says ADHD is not real. I would need to see it. I'm pretty dubious of that.
To what people say.
If Peterson is now saying ADHD is not real at all, then yeah, that's fucking insane. But Stephen can be bad faith sometimes, for sure.
Here's the most terrible thing they say. There are too many people on the planet. Okay, so who says that? I've heard people say that for 30 years. Perfectly ordinary, compassionate people. Well, there's too many people on the planet. And I think, well, for me, that's like hearing Satan himself take possession of their spine and move their mouth. It's like, okay, who are these excess people that you're so concerned about? And exactly who has to go? And when? And why? And how? And who's going to make that decision? And even if you're not consciously aiming at that, you are the one who uttered the words. You're the ones who muttered the phrase. What makes you think that the thing that possessed you to make you utter that words isn't aiming at exactly what you just declared? And so that's a terrible vision. But when you look at what happens in genocidal societies, and they emerge with fair regularity, and usually with a utopian vision at hand, the consequence is the mass destruction of millions of people. So why should I assume that something horrible isn't lurking like that right now, especially given that we have pushed a few 100 million of people back into absolute poverty when we were doing a pretty damn good job of getting rid of that? And I just don't understand what's happening in Germany or in the UK. Like, it's insane. Like, look, man, if they would have got rid of the nuclear plants and made energy 5 times.
What the fuck is he saying? He's basically saying, I can't begin to understand the like incoherence and basically moronicy of the left. There's so many like valid criticisms baked in there, like the refusal of nuclear. Why are we doing this? There's no reason. It's nuclear just is great. It's just a good idea, but we like will never do it because nobody wants it built around them. Because if, right? The big if. And it's a big if. But also nuclear power. Nuclear power. It's so clean. It's so effective. It makes so much power. It's crazy. So he's like outlining a whole bunch of criticisms. And some of them are super valid because surprise, surprise. Here's my theory, okay? Conservatives mostly care about their feelings and what feels ick to them. And leftists mostly care, and by leftists I mean liberals too, mostly care about how good they look. I think a lot of liberals and leftists do not live out their principles at all. And I think conservatives don't either, but liberals specifically try to pick principles that I think make them look good, which is very cringe. I don't think, anyways. Sorry, hot take. I redeemed the points for that. Okay.
Times as expensive.
Water.
And the consequence would have been they weren't burning lignite coal as a backup, and their unit production of energy, of pollution per unit of energy had plummeted. You could say, well, look, we hurt a lot of poor people, but at least the air is cleaner. It's like, no, air's worse and everyone's poorer. So like, explain to me how the hell the left can be anti-nuclear.
Okay.
I don't understand it at all.
Gotcha. All right. This is something that I brought up earlier that is concerning to me. I feel like when people get political beliefs, I feel like what happens is, what we think happens, what we would hope happen is you have some moral or philosophical underpinning.
It's also annoying because like he's saying like the air is worse ever than it was before, but that's not true in a ton of areas. In areas that have been really intentional about cleaning up their air quality, about decreasing pollution, the air quality locally has broadly improved. The issue is like, again, this is why I always say, if you care about the climate, we have to talk about India and China, right? We have to talk about these countries because they ain't quitting. And they're not going to quit because they're in a GDP race. Why would they? Why would they? Of course they're not going to quit. And so it's like, there have been improvements. There have been massive improvements in certain places. it's just also globally hard to tackle without getting everyone globally on board.
And then from there, you combine this with some epistemic understanding of the world. And then you combine these two things, you engage in some form of analysis, and through your moral
It'd be
view,
nice if that was true.
you start to apply like prescriptions. So maybe I'm religious, maybe I analyze society and I see that particular TV shows lead to premarital sex. So my societal prescription is we should ban these TV shows, right? Ideally, this is how you would imagine this process works. What I find happens, unfortunately, all too often is what people do is they join social groups. And then with those social groups, they inherit something that I call like a constellation of beliefs. And this constellation of beliefs, instead of rationally building on each of these, you basically get this like Jenga tower that is like floating over a table, and every block is like supporting itself, and no real part of the tower can be addressed because if you pull out one piece, it all falls apart. So people become like very stuck in all of this combined constellation stuff, and none of it is really given like any analysis, and you can't really push anybody from one way or another in terms of like reevaluating any of the beliefs that are part of this constellation. I wish I would have.
That's good.
Yep,
That's fine. That's right.
Oh, another ad.
Sleep is a routine to adjust your wrist that better through the means of melatonin delicious taste, science-backed tasted bedtime. Time when that's percent.
Right. Well, you know, there are models now of cognitive processing, belief system processing that make the technical claim that what a belief system does is constrain entropy.
Sure, that's not surprising at all.
Okay,
to me.
so and now the signal for released entropy, which would be a consequence of, say, violated fundamental beliefs, is a radical increase in anxiety, right, and a decrease in the possibility of positive emotion. And so people will struggle very hard against that, which is exactly the phenomena that you're describing.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree with what you said. Although,
so here's my
so I'm not sure why it's relevant to the issue I was pursuing.
I'm getting.
Fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's my issue. Okay, so when I'm trying to evaluate a situation, I like to think that I have some. I've got some insulation from.
We got Saint Manny. Also, if you're in the server and you're just in the waiting call and I have no idea who you are, you're never going to get in, just as a heads up.
The effects of what liberals think or what conservatives think is because on my platform, I don't necessarily have an allegiance to a particular political ideology. Like right now, I'm like center left to progressive, but I break really hard from progressive certain.
Bro, my brain is broken from doing bridges set up for the like last month and a half or whatever, however long it's been. I don't even know. I keep noticing every time. I'm like, so one thing I'm noticing, I really like the shot. As you probably guessed, I love the over-the-shoulder shots. I think they're really cozy. But they have autofocus on this camera because it keeps shifting in and out of frame, and I keep in and out of focus, and I'm noticing it now, and I don't want this autism in my life. Oh no, what has happened to me?
Issues. I think Kyle Rittenhouse is in the right. I think basically everything you guys are doing with Indigenous people is insane, including the complete mass grave hoax. I think that I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment. I have beliefs where I can break from my side, pretty hardcore because I am not like allegiant to certain political ideology. One thing that worries me with this constellation of beliefs thing is that sometimes when it comes to evaluating a particular policy or a particular problem, I feel like it's part of the constellation, and sometimes it inhibits people from like taking a step back and reasonably thinking about the issue. So when we're talking about climate change, you mentioned the WEF sacrificing tons of people, the UN, global elites, 5 times energy costs in Germany, genocidal people. I feel like this is part of like a whole thing where it's like, okay, well, let's take a quick step back and let's just like think rationally about this particular issue for one moment. Okay.
Well, you asked me what the motivation for anti-poor policies might be, so that's why I was trying
Well, I
to flesh
did,
that out.
but I got all of those things before I even asked that question. Because I think it's totally possible that somebody might say, okay, well, when you put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it seems to cause an increase in surface temperatures. This has been happening from about the 1800s. And as we've started to track surface temperatures, whether the thermometer is on top of the Empire State Building or in the middle of a field, it seems like there's an average rise in temperatures. And people all around the world are observing this. In some places more than others. If you live in Seattle and 20 years ago, your apartment building wasn't built with air conditioner units, you feel that now. If you live in a place in London and you've never had an air conditioner before, now that's not acceptable. I think that people on the ground can see that there are changes. And I think that scientists, when they look in labs, can see changes. It might be that some models aren't precise enough. And it might be that for reasons we don't even understand
Well, the
now,
economic models certainly aren't precise enough.
Sure, maybe that
Not
might be
maybe.
true.
So
They
bad
can't even
faith
use them
here.
to predict the price of it.
It's so disappointing. Like I definitely like Jordan Peterson. I don't think he's always bad. Like he was so good faith at the beginning, especially about certain topics that they were getting on. What was their earlier topic? gigantism, redistribution economies, and like Marxism in general. But now that they're on global climate, he didn't say that the economic models are good. He already bit the bullet that they might not be great, but now he's just pivoting to, yeah, well, the
Chat,
economic
5
models are really
pounds
bad.
from Simon Allen. Always appreciate Erudite's vibes, Kyla, on a Sim's behalf.
Thank you.
A single stock for 6 months. The economic models are not sufficiently accurate to calculate out the consequences of climate change over a century.
And
not in the
when you,
least.
I like the comparison because economic models can't predict individual stocks, but they do predict the rough rise of the market. If you invest in the
Yeah,
S&P
except for
500,
the
you
odd
get about
cataclysmic collapse.
Nope. Even with the cataclysmic collapse accounted for, you're going to see about 7% returns on average with inflation over
I
long
wouldn't
periods
call
of time.
an average a very sophisticated model analogous
That's
to
fine,
a
but
climate change.
that's the difference between climate and weather, though, right? Is that climate isn't going to tell you what the temperature is on a given day, but it might tell you the average surface temperature over a period of 1 year or 10 years. And then that's the difference between climate and weather. That's the
Well,
difference between
that's
like
the
the market and the
hypothetical
stock.
difference.
It is a hypothetical, but again, we're seeing more and more and more data every single year.
He was sort of intellectually ambushed. I don't know if it's fair to say that Stephen was intellectually ambushed, and I don't know if I'm saying that he thinks that, just because I doubt Peterson came in planning to talk about environmentalism itself necessarily. The problem is that Peterson kind of consistently talks about a couple of things. And so this is one of his like favorite go-to talking points, as well as COVID, right? Add on putt chase. But Destiny's doing like super well, despite being like pretty not prepped for this. I totally forgot what I was going to look up.
That
Okay,
things are
so
getting hotter and hotter,
let's
so I
jump,
mean, it's-
let's
yeah.
jump out of our cloud of presuppositions for a minute.
Sure.
Now, one of the things that...
Or no, wait.
yeah,
Before
okay.
we do that, actually,
Yeah,
because I don't
okay.
want to say,
Yeah, that's fine.
there are some things that we've gotten as a result of investing in green energy that have been good. So, for instance, the power of solar energy has dropped dramatically in the United States, faster than anybody thought possible, such that solar energy is like competitive or beating fossil fuels in certain areas. As long as you can set the solar panels up, you're literally beating
Yeah,
fossil
and
fuels.
as long as the sun is shining.
Well, it still is. We're not a nuclear winter
No,
yet.
no,
So.
but it isn't when it's cloudy. And it
That's
isn't
why I
in the
said
winter.
depending on where you live. There are places,
Right.
equatorial places. If you're trying to set up a solar panel in Seattle, you might not have as much luck, or New York City
Or
might not have as
Germany.
much, or in Germany. True.
Or
There
all
are
of
also,
Europe,
I think
or
there,
in Canada.
there are also other issues that are coming up that I think are obfuscating or
See, again, like, yeah, but that doesn't mean that the solar comeuppance isn't valuable for places like Nevada and Arizona. It's super valuable. There's lots of homeowners completely transitioning to solar that are like basically paying nothing. In fact, sometimes I think in some states you can even get paid back for if you generate excess energy. That's good. It's just good to do that. It's good to incentivize your citizens to do that. It's obviously not a solution when you live in fucking Alaska. But that's just saying solar isn't a solution for Alaska. I get that he's saying, like, Peterson's argument, the reason why he would be saying this is broadly, I don't care that it's good for people in Arizona. It doesn't broadly solve the issue. And the problem is that when people talk about climate change, they're talking about a broadband societal issue. And so I don't really care if it's good for Arizona. It doesn't really solve the global issue that is green energy versus fossil fuels.
ability to evaluate what's being caused by green energy versus not. When we look at energy increases in Germany, I think there's a similar constellation around nuclear energy, for instance. People don't want nuclear energy because they think of nukes, and they think of nuclear meltdowns, and they think of Chernobyl, and they think of Fukushima, and they think of atomic bombs, and that's it. And that's stupid. And I agree with you. But nuclear energy is a totally viable alternative to other forms of
Then
fossil
why
fuels.
does the radical left oppose it? You think it's just this See, you
For the
it
same
might be just-
for the same reason the right opposes vaccines, because it sounds scary and it's a big thing and they don't trust it.
Oh,
It comes
no.
from
the
big
right
pharmaceutical-
has a reason to distrust vaccines in the
Why did he crack open? You could tell. He's like, I don't want to talk about. I wonder if Steven's like, I don't really want to fight with him on environmentalism that much anymore, because probably A, he doesn't care about it, and B, wasn't prepped. And he knew that he would bite the vaccine thing, which Steven probably feels much more prepped to fight about. I think I could be wrong, but I suspect this was decently intentional to steer Peterson into the vaccine conversation, where Steven's going to feel much more capable of managing. That's my guess.
aftermath of the COVID debacle.
Well,
Because
I
they
know-
were imposed by force, and that was a very
you get to
bad
choose if
idea.
you have a nuclear power plant. That's imposed by force too, no? You don't get to choose where your energy comes from if you live in a country. You turn the light switch and hopefully you don't have a Chernobyl that melts down in your particular town, right?
Well, you get to choose it because you can buy it or not.
Well,
That's
I mean,
the choice.
It does, but the
Nobody
negative.
had a choice with the vaccines.
Nobody had a choice whether or not they lived near Chernobyl or not. Nobody's a choice.
Sure,
There's a
they
nuclear
could
power
move
plant.
away.
Well, how realistic
that's
is it
a
to move
choice.
like 500 miles? That's like telling conservatives when Biden tried to do
Okay,
the OSHA
well,
mandate for vaccines, like, well, you can just get a different job, right?
I don't want to debate about whether or not large nuclear power plants are frightening. They are.
Sure, okay.
And there are technologies now where that's not a problem. And I think that's
I
a
do support nuclear power
counterproductive
plants. I think
place
it's a
for our
good-
discussion to go, because I also
True DGG love. The biggest bottleneck, my understanding, for solar power right now is specifically battery storage. I could be wrong, but that's been my understanding. Is that like that's the area that's been researched a lot and is the biggest bottleneck for a lot of green energy.
understand why people are afraid of it. But what I don't understand, for example, is why the Germans shut down their nuclear power plants and the Californians are thinking and doing the same thing when they have to import power from France anyways. Like, it's complete
Or
bloody-
burn coal, which is a million
they're-
times worse.
Not
Yeah.
just coal, lignite.
Yeah.
Right. And then with regards to these renewable power sources,
Lignite.
they have a number of problems. One is they're not energy dense. They require tremendous infrastructure to produce. They might be renewable at the energy level, but they're not renewable at the raw materials level. So that's a complete bloody lie. They're insanely variable in their power production. And because of that, you have to have a backup system, and the backup system has to be reliable without variability. And that means if you have a renewable grid, you have to have a parallel fossil fuel or coal grid to back it up when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, which is unfortunately very, very frequently. And so, again, and I'm not going to say there's no place for renewable
Thanks,
energy
Faithless.
like solar and wind, because maybe there are.
Remember, if you like the stream, you like what I'm doing, we're trying to get back on a decently regular stream schedule. Become a member. You can access all my VODs, Twitch subs. You can give me one for free if you type !sub. I get a free Twitch Prime sub. Every month you can give it away. It's free, charges you nothing, gives me like $2.50. We love that. Watching stream, watching my edited content, of course, is always good. Appreciate that too. Yeah. Oh, and super chat. Participate in the conversation. As everyone describes, saying that 100% backup system has to be available. That's not how our energy system works. Yeah, I was about to say, I don't know enough about energy system grids. I guess my question would be, maybe somebody knows, not that I necessarily am going to trust chat anyways, but I'd be super curious to know if he's a little bit accurate about this or if he's way off. So in my understanding, when I think about energy grids, and I know, just to be clear, I know literally nothing. I am trying to think my way through from the bottom up. You have one grid that's solar, or a grid that utilizes solar dominantly, and the sun goes down for like 2 weeks at a time, and you don't have battery storage enough, or you didn't have enough anyways. You need some sort of additional power source to man those grids when the output from the solar isn't enough. Is that correct? Or is that wild? It sounds like it makes sense, but I don't know anything about energy grids. He keeps not mentioning nuclear because he thinks that there isn't like a societal push for nuclear because nobody wants nuclear in their backyard. That's why he's not mentioning it. One grid, but you need to start from other forms of generator. Yes, you need a blah, blah, blah. Okay. Kyla's doing a great job covering this. But I'm guessing along with you. Yeah. You need storage and another source. Okay. So that is kind of right. The low capacity, blah, 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 blah. Okay.
Specific niche locales where those are useful, but the logical, what would you say, antidote
Super
to the
chat,
problem of reliability.
$9.99
Hey!
from Pondering Politics. Are you staying your
Hey!
fellow Canadian here?
Nah, I'm standing him where I would stand anyone, I guess. I've stand him on a few things, like for being good faith in the beginning about like Marxism and stuff. And I'm not standing him very hard over the climate change stuff. Not been a big fan.
If
So hi, thanks for visiting.
we're concerned about carbon, but we're really not, would be to use nuclear. And the Greens haven't been like flying their bloody flags for 30 years saying, well, we could use fossil fuel.
I like his fashion. I like the jackets. I like the drip. I really like this jacket specifically. And apparently it pissed off fundamentalist Eastern Orthodox people, so I like it even more. I like the coat. I even like the 2-color coat. I think it's kind of cool. Yeah, I like those outfits. They're fucking dank. Got more drip than a leaky faucet. True. Battery technology improved, and technically we'd be fine with just solar and wind. Yes. Okay, yeah. Yeah, my understanding of the main issue with all of the pure green grids, excluding nuclear, is the variability in the source. And most importantly, batteries that can't store enough for long enough to make these grids a primary grid that we can always trust, like, and again, a city to run on. That's my understanding, right? You don't want an entire city going down because the batteries ran out because there just wasn't enough solar. And then typically they have a backup. And a lot of the backups, I think, are going to typically be some sort of fossil fuel. That's my understanding. Again, I could be wrong. I could be dumb. I could be a big dumbass.
For fertilizer and feed people, and we could use nuclear power to drive energy costs down in a carbon dioxide free manner. That seems pretty bloody self-evident to me. And so then it brings up this other mystery that we were talking about earlier. You know, what's the impetus behind all this? Because the cover story is, oh, we care about carbon dioxide.
Yeah, somebody just brought up also disposal of batteries and like the lifetime of batteries. Because isn't it very, very, very hard on the environment? Like we don't really have a good breakdown process of batteries. Or has that also changed? It'd be great if it had changed.
Super chat, $5 from Super 6 to 1. The background windows on BR/Jizz are a bit bright and silhouetting the speakers. Home Depot sells tinted static cling film that would help darken them.
Yep, looking into cling film next. Just going to focus on audio for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll kind of re-update the set probably between third and fourth episode 3 and episode 4. Thank you for the super chat.
Don't think they do.
Are conservatives pro-nuclear? I think a lot of them are. I'm trying to think. I don't know many conservatives. I don't know many conservatives that are anti-nuclear. Except for like really dumb ones who just think it's scary. But that would be like a conservative mom who just like has no idea what's going on. She's like, that sounds scary. I don't think like broadly conservatives have like a group opinion that's negative nuclear.
Especially given the willingness to sacrifice the poor. It makes no sense
can
to
recycle
me.
Batteries.
And I think it's relevant to the issue you brought up, which is that people have these constellations of ideas, and there's a driving force in the midst of them, so to speak. They're not necessarily aware of what that driving force is.
Isn't it more likely that people are either misinformed or misguided than people are legitimately trying to depopulate the planet?
Look, misinformed and ignorant, that's plenty relevant and worth considering. And stupidity is always a better explanation than malevolence. But malevolence is also an explanation. And no, I don't think it's a better explanation because...
Why would we waste so much money?
Oh, this is what drives me crazy. Like, this is him violating his own rules for life. Like, there's a specific thing that he talks about. Never assume maliciousness where stupidity and, like, ignorance suffices. And I would argue the left resisting nuclear is fully sufficient to be explained by stupidity and ignorance. Way before malevolence. It's not it's such a leap to me. I hate this. You need enough evidence to make this leap. You do have evidence that the left seems to be somewhat resistant to nuclear, particularly further left. And you do have evidence that people think it's very spooky. You don't have evidence that they're aware of the fact that they're wrong about all this, and they're choosing to do it anyways, in part as a global goal to cull the poor population down and fuck them. Like, that makes no sense. There's no evidence for this.
Sending food aid, having Bush do, programs through Africa for AIDS, having other billionaires like Bill Gates invest so much money in anti-malarial stuff. Like,
I agree, but he's not breaking his own rule. He's like acting like this is an exception. Obviously, he would agree that there are exceptions to that rule where malevolence is sufficient, but I don't feel like we've nearly untangled enough evidence to suggest malevolence. Obviously, he feels like he does, but yeah.
Why would all the global elites be so invested in helping and killing the people here at the same time?
Well, some of it's confusion.
Okay.
And some of it's the fact, many things can be happening simultaneously with a fair bit of internal paradox because people just don't know which way is up often. But the problem with the argument...
$5 from the professionalist. My profile is Shadow the Edgehog. I will be in the waiting room if you still want to dunk on people for content.
I don't know what we're fighting about, so you'll have to message me what we're fighting about.
So you tell me what you think about.
Where is the left resistant to nuclear? In like further left areas for sure, people are resistant to nuclear, specifically because they're worried that it is like bad for the environment and stuff like that. The issue is that he would also say, so he's saying two things. He's saying, one, that they're resistant. I don't know if there's as much evidence for that, but two, he's saying, if the left genuinely believes in environmentalism and genuinely believes that fossil fuel is an issue, why are they spending so much time fighting against fossil fuel and not investing as much energy as possible into promoting nuclear power? Because it's the most sustainable, most likely to be effective long-term energy source. So he's not as much saying that they're being resistant. He's saying, why aren't they championing it? If they really care about solving the climate issue, they should all be deeply championing nuclear power. That's what he's saying. Which is true. And he's saying, why aren't they? And the answer is because they're dumb. Because it's nicer to shit on things than to like advocate for things. I don't know. It's a good question though. Why aren't they? Probably misinformed. Probably there's no political will behind nuclear after Fukushima. That's probably the biggest one. It's just going to be hard to get a movement of people that are going to be really pro-nuclear power. Nuclear power is not really that sexy. It's hard to take like a bunch of like dying cancerous children from Chernobyl or the disaster of Fukushima and be like, la 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 la, let's do it again. Even though they shouldn't be worried about that because they drive cars, and driving cars is way more dangerous than living near a nuclear power plant.
Yes. So, Hitler's cover story was that he wanted to make the glorious Third Reich and elevate the Germans to the highest possible status for the longest possible period of time. Okay, but that wasn't the outcome. The outcome was that Hitler shot himself through the head after he married his wife, who died from poison the same day, in a bunker underneath Berlin while Europe was in flames. Well, he was insisting that the Germans deserved exactly what they got because they weren't the noble people he thought they were. And then you might say, well, Hitler's plans collapsed in flames, and wasn't that a catastrophe? Or you could say that was exactly what he was aiming for from the beginning, because he was brutally resentful and miserable right from the time he was, a rejected artist at the age.
You can't say that. You literally can't say that. He wasn't aiming for that. It's just the most reasonable possible outcome from his resentment and bitterness. This is such a weird kind of psychoanalytic way of being like, but wasn't Hitler truly just desiring self-destruction? It's like, no. Even though that's the most likely outcome of what he was doing, that doesn't mean he was actually desiring that. It's not about sticking up for Hitler. This isn't sticking up for Hitler at all. Peterson isn't defending Hitler right now. He's not being like, Hitler's awesome. He's literally saying Hitler's outcome is exactly what should have been expected from how gross and disgusting and malevolent and angry it was. The problem is that he's comparing, climate change to that. It's like,
age of 16. And so he was working, or something was working within him, and something that might well be regarded as demonic, whose end goal was precisely what it attained, which was the devastation of hundreds of millions of people, and Europe left in a smoking ruin. And the cover story was the Grand Third Reich. And so there's no reason at all to assume that we're not in exactly the same situation.
It's like he's basically making a psychoanalytic argument. Perhaps he was just so full of bitterness and resentment that truly Hitler just wanted to see the world burn. And it's just like, come on. Also, when he says demons, he could be meaning it religiously, but he also tends to steal religious language and then apply it to non-religious things. So when he's saying demons, this could just as much apply to potentially a psychoanalytic word. And I don't know which it is, because he's also pretty religious now.
right now.
I think there's a great reason to assume. I think that Hitler's motives and everything that he was trying to do wasn't a secret. I don't think that anybody had to guess that he was incredibly anti-Semitic, that his Aryan supremacy was going to lead to the destruction and the murder of like so many different people in concentration camps. Like none of this was a secret. It's not like he was hiding it.
He hid a lot of it.
I mean, like he tried to maybe hide the death camps, but nobody in Germany was wondering like, wow, crazy that pogroms are happening against Jewish people. That's so crazy. Or wow, they're all being shipped to just mainly the Jews to camps to work. Like that's kind of interesting. Or wow, he talks about this a lot in Mein Kampf, but maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't think you can compare like Hitler to people that are worried about climate change. The worry that I have here is because if we're applying this,
people in Germany thought Hitler was perfectly motivated by the highest of benevolent.
If I were to take this standard of evidence and apply this lens of analysis, couldn't I say the exact same thing about the conservative constellation of belief? They don't want to intervene anywhere in the world because they don't care about the problems there. They're anti-immigration because they hate brown people. Trump wanted to ban Muslims from coming to the United States because he's xenophobic. Conservatives don't want to have taxes to help the poor because they want homeless people to starve and die in the winter. But like, I feel like
some of that's true. And yes, you can adopt that criticism. I think the difference with regards especially to the libertarian side of the conservative enterprise, but also to some degree to the conservative enterprise, is they're not building a central gigantic organization to put forward this particular utopian claim. And so even if the conservatives are as morally addled as the leftists, and to some degree that might be true, they're not organized with the same gigantism in mind. And so they're not as dangerous.
How could you possibly say that about the conservatives? Didn't DeSantis, like today or yesterday, pass the 14-year-old bill where 14-year-olds can't be on social media? You may like that bill or not, but that bill is absolutely increasing the size of the government because the government now wants to oversee, not wasting fries by getting them to Freya. Oh, these are old. They're kind of cold. McDonald's fries kind of lose their goodness within like 5 minutes. Even as a DeSantis fan, yeah. Like, conservatives are absolutely right now actively, constantly trying to push and increase the size of governance. They're trying to tell you what you can do with your kid. They're trying to tell you what you can say in school. And they're trying to they absolutely are. I know it's not Chick-fil-A. I'm so sad. Are McDonald's fries good for you? No. What?
At the moment. Now, they could well be, and they have been in the past, but at the moment, they're not. And so, of course, you can be skeptical about people's motivations when they're brandishing the moral flag.
Why would we say that they're not as concerned about the gigantism? I feel like everybody is when it's a particular thing that they care about.
You mean whether they would be inclined in that direction?
For sure. That conservatives wield the power of the government whenever they feel they need to, just as liberals do, right? Conservatives were very happy to see, for instance, abortion was brought back as a state-regulated thing.
That's a good objection.
It's also really interesting for him to talk about how like the left is more organized towards like a gigantism. I so often hear almost the same thing, specifically organization. When you talk to liberals and lefties, they'll often complain about how lefties can never work together. And yet conservatives are so good at organizing. And it's like, this isn't super true. Both groups are pretty bad at organizing and unifying together. They're constantly infighting.
I think that you're correct in your assumption that once people identify a core area of concern, they're going to be motivated to seek power to implement that concern.
I think cancel culture is a good idea too. I think conservatives prior to the 2000s, if they could censor everything related to either LGBT stuff or weird musical stuff or stuff that they didn't want their kids to watch, conservatives would do it. But now that you see that like liberals and progressives are kind of wielding that corporate hammer, now conservatives are very much, well, hold on, we need freedom of...
Everyone is super opposed to gigantism when gigantism is on the opposite side and not appealing to their own interests. But the moment that you have the government doing things that you want them to do, suddenly you're okay with the expansion of the government, unless you're a libertarian, to be honest.
Speech, we need to platform everybody. And now progressives are like, well, hold on, maybe we shouldn't platform people.
I've got no disagreement with those things that you said, and I have no disagreement about your proposition that people will seek power to impose their central doctrine. Okay, so then you might say, and so we can have a very serious conversation about that. What do we have that ameliorates that tendency?
In the United States, we've got hopefully a form of decentralized government. I can't speak to Canada as much, but...
Yes, that's true. So that's one of the institutional protections against that, because what that does is put various forms of power striving in conflict with one another, right? And so that's a very intelligent solution. then there are psychological and philosophical solutions as well. And one of them might be that you abjure the use of power, right, as a principle. And so, and this is one of the things that was done very badly during the COVID era, let's say, because the rule should be something like you don't get to impose your solution on people using compulsion and force. There's a doctrine there, which is any policy that requires compulsion and force is to be looked upon with extreme skepticism. Now, it's tricky because now and then you have to deal with psychopaths, and they tend not to respond to anything but force. And so there's an exception there that always has to be made, and it's a very tricky exception. But look, let me tell you a story, and you tell me what you think about this.
It isn't related to anything to Bible stories. What are you guys talking about? Yes, she often utilizes Bible stories, but first of all, Bible stories can be highly utilizable. And arguing your point, I guess, A, they're live ideas for most people in North America because most people have some level of Protestant understanding. And B, just because they're biblical stories doesn't mean that the ideas that emerge from them are suddenly obsolete because you don't believe in the God. Like, who cares?
Because I think it's very relevant to the concern that you just expressed. And I don't believe that the conservatives are necessarily any less tempted by the calling of power than the leftists. That's going to vary from situation to situation. Though I would say probably overall in the 20th century, the leftists have the worst record in terms of sheer numbers of people killed. So
I mean, it depends on how we're quantifying
not
that.
really. Okay, we'll just quantify Mao.
$2 from CERN unapplicable. Speed limits are tyrannical under this reasoning.
Now, it's so interesting because the slippery slope argument of when can the government expand and when can it not is the truly most unsolvable problem. I've been thinking so much about it recently. The same argument that I would use against a conservative is fundamentally a lot of arguments that's going to be used against me when it comes to slippery slope. We're just kind of putting the line along the slope in different locations. And there has to be a way to specifically quantify stopping points. There has to be. Otherwise, there's no solution to this problem. Right? Why are speed limits not tyrannical? They're imposed, they're sanctioned, you get in trouble, it's compulsory.
How's that? Direct death of 100 million people. So, that's a pretty stark fact. And if we're going to argue about that, well, then we're really not going to get anywhere. So, and
I'm not disagreeing that the Holodomor happened as well. The Soviet Union and China were horrible.
20 to
I mean, I'm not
50
going to.
million
Yeah, I'm not
people
going
in the
to.
Soviet-
Say
yeah,
that was one horrible thing. Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah.
it's a war of.
I'm just saying for World War II, it depends on how much you attribute the war deaths to Nazi Germany, et cetera, et cetera. But sure, largely speaking, I don't think that the left beat the right because the right wasn't trying. I don't think it's because Hitler's lack of trying led him to kill less people than who ended up dying during the Great Leap Forward or during the industrialization of the Soviet
Yes,
Union.
well, I also think it's an open question still to what degree Hitler's policies were right-wing versus left-wing. And no one's done the analysis properly yet to determine that.
Well, what do we
Because
consider?
it was a national socialist movement for a reason. And the socialist part of it wasn't accidental.
Well, but there was no, cooperatively formed businesses that were owned by all of the people for the people and distributed to the people. And I don't think redistribution was high on Hitler's list of things to do for.
That's true. It was
but
a
I do
strange
think
mix of totalitarian policy.
I don't think it was a strange mix. I think it was a bid to appeal to mid-left and center-left, the KPD and the German Socialist Party by calling themselves National Socialists. I think it was very much like an authoritarian, ultra-nationalist regime that pretty squarely fits with. People get mad if you call something far right or far left because they have an attachment to the terms,
one of the things I would have done if I would have been able to hang on to my professorship at the University of Toronto would have been to extract out a random sample of Nazi policies and strip them of markers of their origin and present them to a set of people with conservative or leftist beliefs and see who agreed with them more. And that analysis has never been done as far as I know. So we actually don't know. And we could know if the social scientists would do their bloody job, which they don't, generally speaking. That's something we could know. We could probably use the AI systems we have now, the large language models, to determine to what degree left and right beliefs intermingled in the rise of National Socialism.
Okay, that'd be a fucking fascinating study. I would love to read that study. Actually, so interesting. But also, he could still do the study. You don't have to just be in a university to do research. You can just do research. You can just do it on your own. You have to develop good methodology. And to some degree, because you have no ethics board, you're going to have a hard time getting published. But there's like think tanks and stuff also have ethics boards and stuff like there's ways to do research that is outside of university. I haven't looked into it a ton, but you can.
So that's all technically possible. So, and it hasn't been done, so it's a matter of opinion.
Sure.
So,
I don't necessarily disagree. That's something you could do.
Okay, I was going to tell you this story.
Okay,
well, this has to do with the use of power. So, I spent a time.
Ayla did decent work with no formal background. Yeah, Ayla's really captured like the spirit of science. She definitely like methodologically could improve, but did that donut not go through? I'm so sorry. Hold on, let me check. Okay, play.
With a group of scholars putting and analyzing the Exodus story, an Exodus seminar recently. And so the Exodus story is a very interesting story because it's what would you say? It's an analysis of the central tendency of movement away from tyranny and slavery. That's a good way of thinking about it. The possibility of tyranny and the possibility of slavery are possibilities that present themselves to everyone within the confines of their life, psychologically and socially. You can be your own tyrant with regards to the imposition of a set of radical doctrines that you have to abide by and punish yourself brutally whenever you deviate from them. And we all contend with the issue of tyranny and slavery. And there's an alternative path, and that's what the Exodus story lays out. And Moses is the exemplar of that alternative path, although he has his flaws. And one of his flaws is that he turns too often to the use of force. So he kills an Egyptian, for example, an Egyptian noble who has slayed a Hebrew, one of Moses' Hebrew slave brothers.
Aha, I know, I see it. The argument against renewables is that they require batteries. If coal kills people later, cobalt and lithium kill people now in mines. Which is better? Nuclear is the right option. Sincerely, a non-Republican conservative. I did get an anonymous $20 tip. Found it. You're good. It came in. Don't donate again. Well, you can, obviously, but it did come through. What do you think of the biblical Exodus story whenever Egyptologists make videos, they never mention Jews in Egypt? I have never been a literalist for much of the Bible. So the Jews not actually like being, I mean, Egypt didn't even have slaves in the way that the Bible talks about, because it's, this is not how these ancient stories were crafted. That's not, the point of them isn't to be this like historical accuracy of like the Jews walking out of Egypt. It's to talk, it's literally elders teaching ancient Jewish people about their origins and why they're special and why they matter. So like, yeah, there's tons of Christians that it breaks their fucking brain when they realize that like the Jews were probably never in Egypt. And if they were certainly not there in the capacity that it's talked about as like slaves, in part because they didn't really have slavery like that. And any evidence of Semitic people in Egypt, they were like middle class, like merchants. Yeah. Anyways, sorry.
He has to leave. There's a variety of indications in the text that he uses his staff, he uses his rod, and he uses power when he's supposed to use persuasion and legal or verbal invitation and argumentation. And this happens most spectacularly right at the end of the sojourn. So Moses has spent 40 years leading the Israelites through the desert. And he's right on the border of the promised land. And really what that means at a more fundamental basis is that he's at the threshold of attaining what he's been aiming at, what he's devoted his whole life to. And he's been a servant of that purpose in the highest order.
Right.
And that Israel.
Okay, somebody said that he like keeps blabbing on about biblical stories. Okay, now I agree. He's just kind of blabbing on about biblical stories. No, I don't want to debate with somebody about climate change. I'm good. I'm not prepped.
Israelites are still in the desert, which means they're lost and confused. They don't know which way is up. They're still slaves. And now they're dying of thirst, which is what you die of, spiritual thirst, if you're sufficiently lost. And they go to Moses and ask him to intercede with God. And God tells Moses to speak to the rocks so that they'll reveal the water within. And Moses strikes the rocks with his rod twice instead, right? He uses force. And so God says to him, you'll now die before you enter the promised land. It's Joshua who enters and not Moses. Okay, and you might wonder why I'm telling you that story. I'm telling you that story because those concepts at the center of that cloud of concepts that you described are stories.
Steve giggling in the background is so cringe, okay? If we're like moving further into like a more general populist appeal, if that's where he wants to go, you have to engage in social niceties. You can't like giggle in the background, even though he's kind of like rambling like your crazy uncle to like get to like, I don't know if he needed to go through all of the Exodus story in this level of detail to even include the meaning of the Exodus story that he wanted to.
Right. They're stories. And if they're well formulated, they're archetypal stories. And this is an archetypal story that's illustrating the danger of the use of compulsion and force. No one's.
What? Sorry.
So one of the problems you're obviously obsessed by.
I'm sorry. I'm not even disagreeing with him that that's like in part the purpose of Exodus. Like that is one theme that could emerge from Exodus. Sure. We did not need all this. Oh, I think it was a reflexive giggle. They died of dehydration. I know. I'm not saying Steve is a big meanie bobini. I'm saying he's got to work on like the social niceties.
And that I'm trying to solve is what do we do as an alternative to tyranny?
Like I cringed so hard at the end of our Ryan Macbeth conversation. Ryan gave him a shirt, that Live Laugh Launch shirt. And he was like, do you like the shirt? And Ryan is obviously looking for Steve to be like, yeah, I love the shirt. Cause like Ryan was he's a gifter. Like he gave us a lot of like gifts and stuff. And so Ryan said to Steve, do you like the shirt? And Steve said, I mean, I'll wear it. And I was just like, just say you like the damn shirt. Just say you like the shirt. That's what he's looking for. Just say it. Just say it. There's no reason not to. I know that you aren't thinking it's a funny shirt. You're going to like the shirt. You're going to wear the shirt.